Well, I've messed up fantastically. This engine is a twin turbo 3 litre V6 and there's quite clearly something missing. And that is the twin turbos. So these turbos are 30 years old and they're probably not in the best of conditions. And because these turbos are 30 years old, I don't want to stick them back on the engine in case they blow up and take the engine with them. And it's all that work wasted. So because I'm not going to stick the turbos on as they are, we've got something special in these boxes to fix that. And there's also something in that bag to make everything a whole lot better on the engine. So let me show you what's in these boxes and we can get straight into it. So in this box we've got a brand new oil return gasket along with some copper crush washers. We've got a syringe of oil to prime the turbo when it's put back together. We've also got a brand new turbo core to replace the old ones that are in the turbos because they've been leaking and they're very rusty. So in the new boxes with some brand new turbines so we don't have to stick the old ones on because we know the new ones, well, should work in theory. So I decided to go for some Mellet turbo cores because I read good things on the forums, and in the kit you get the core assembly, which is your exhaust and your impeller for the intake. You get your exhaust gasket for the oil return, your copper crush washers for the lines that go onto the core, and you also get a syringe of oil so you can correctly prime the turbo. Because if you stick the turbo in but you don't prime it with oil first by either pulling the fuel injector relay to let the oil circulate and the pressure build, or sticking the oil in it before you put it in, the turbo can become damaged because on the first start up it won't have any oil in it, so it'll be spinning dry on the bearings and that can just cause it to go boom. And no one wants to blow a turbo. So before I do anything, the first thing I'm going to do is clean these crusty manifolds and get them back on the engine. So then that way when we've gone through the turbos we can just bolt them straight up instead of them having to sit around for a while until the manifold's finished and bolted back to the engine. So let's get the manifold back on. That is the manifold back on and it's all nice and clean with a fresh new gasket. It's exactly the same on the back side. Also look at the casting marks in those manifolds. So now that the manifolds are back on the engine, they're all nice and clean and bolted up with a fresh gasket, we can now grab the turbos, start splitting them down, put the new cores in, and once they're built back up we can put them back on the engine, and then that should be it with the turbos. We've also got something else that needs to go on the turbo to then go to the engine, which is an upgrade to the old ones. And that is these. In this bag is some braided oil lines for the turbo, along with some braided coolant lines, because on the turbo here you can see the coolant lines are all crusty. That one's actually snapped. Same on that side. So instead of trying to fit the lines back to those crusty pipes, I thought I'd just get a complete replacement and they're going to look a lot better. So let's get them on the bench and strip them down. So we're going to start with the rear turbo, and the first thing I want to do is take the coolant lines off, the oil return line, and then that leaves us with just the turbo, and then we can split this down because this centre section here is the core. So this is the impeller on the intake side, and then this is the impeller on the exhaust side, so we need to get these off to get that out, to get this and this to swap. The first thing we'll take off is the oil return line, and that is only held in with two M6 bolts. Now we'll take off the coolant hard lines and then we can remove the wastegate. Now that they're off, the next thing we want to do is take the wastegate off. So what the wastegate does is it helps to control boost pressure by allowing the exhaust gases to bypass the turbine when it gets to a certain PSI. The way it does this is this little port on top of the wastegate connects to the boost side of the intake. So what that means is once the boost pressure on the intake side gets to say 10 psi for example, there's a spring inside this little chamber that is only set to move at 10 psi. So say the pressure gets to 10 psi, that spring will then compress, pushing this linkage forwards, opening a flap on the exhaust side and allowing the exhaust gases to bypass the turbine so it doesn't keep spooling up. Apologies if my voice sounds croaky, I've somehow managed to catch a cold in the summer. Let's get that off. The wastegate's held on with two M8 bolts on the front of the turbine housing, and then there's an R pin that holds the two linkages together. You can see there's the little flap on the inside. So now to split this housing we need to take that clamp off. So because of the age of the turbo and the fact that the core was very rusty, I had to stick it in the vise with some WD-40 down the crack there to allow it to penetrate. Then I used the blowtorch to heat it up a little bit. And then with a big pair of grips and some brief force, I managed to spin the core to get it away from the exhaust side of the turbo. So now the turbo is still one, but if I get another big pair of grips on it, give it a spin, like so. That's the core away from the exhaust housing. And you can see from around the lip that it's pretty crusty. So looking at that alone, I'm glad we are changing the cores for 2 new fresh ones. So now it's just the intake side of the turbo we need to take off, and to do this on the back, there's a really big C-clip that goes the whole way round on the inside. So if we get any C-clip spanners, pliers in there, pull that C-clip off and then separate the two, and then it should be ready for the new core after I've cleaned this up and the exhaust side. I snapped both pairs of my C-clip pliers trying to get this stupid C-clip out, so now I had to use some needle nose pliers. So after using every tool I own to try and get this snap ring out, I finally got it out, and look at the size of this. So this is the C-clip that holds the turbo core. I can't even get it off. That holds the core to the intake. And look how thick that is. So I had to try and get it off. I had to get it off on the inside because, as you can see, there's a bit of a lip, if it'll focus. There's a lip on the inside just there. It snaps on the inside and keeps this in, but now that that's free, you can just pull the inner turbine off, and that is it. And there's the housing. So now that this tank of a clip is off, I'm going to clean the intake side and the exhaust side, get them all nice and fresh. Then we'll build them up with a brand new core, get that turbo built up. I'll do the other side, which I think is the front. And then we'll fit all the new oil return lines and coolant lines and get it on the engine, where hopefully it'll stay. So now the turbo is all nice and clean, and I had to drill a stud out on that, which took me a very long time, but that's clean, and everything here is what we need to put it all back together. So let's get this turbo back together. Putting the turbos back together is exactly the same as taking them apart, just in reverse, as you'd imagine. But now I went to put the exhaust side of the turbo back on, and it just wouldn't fit. Well, I've messed up fantastically because I've got the wrong turbos. Because I got that close to getting the turbo together, and I realised when I'm trying to get the exhaust side of the turbo on, it goes over, fine, fits fine. But then there's a gap, and I was thinking maybe it needs to be pressed in. Well, no, it doesn't need to be pressed in. When I've looked at the old turbos by comparison to the ones I've bought, the shoulder that sits into the exhaust side on the newer ones is a lot bigger than the old ones because they have a little step collar on them. I'll show you that as well. If I show you the old one, which I've cleaned up for now, the top hat is much deeper and the shoulder on the bottom is a lot smaller. So let me show you them next to each other. You can see that's the difference, and that's enough to stop it from going in. So then I was thinking of sending these turbos back, then I realised when I bought them, I'm well outside of the refund period now, which means I've basically got 2 turbos I can't use. So I've done a bit of digging and I found out the internals of the turbos, the shaft, the seals, the splines and the turbines on either side are exactly the same on both turbos, which is good because it's only the external housing that's stopping me from putting them together. So this is the turbine shaft out of the old turbo, and as you can see it's very crusty and the seals have failed on it, so oil was leaking. And that is a shaft off the new turbo. So I'll show you this. They're exactly the same. So when you get them side by side, there is literally no difference between the two. There's a seal and a gap there. There's a seal and a gap there. There's a brass collar and a brass collar. And that's literally it. So what I think I'm going to try and do is, I've cleaned the old turbo housing up to get rid of all the rust and oil, dirt, all that. I'm going to put the new shaft and turbines in the old housing. And if they fit and they seal, then job done. But if they don't, and I start having problems, I'll just have to buy new turbos again. But for now, I think my best option with what I've got is to put the new shafts in the old housings and make sure all the seals are swapped and make sure it doesn't leak. But in all fairness, the old housing has actually come up quite well with a bit of a wire brush and some brake cleaner just to get all the crap off. And I'm quite surprised at how clean it looks based on what it did look like, because it did look like that. And as you can see, that's very crusty. So I'm going to swap the seals, the shafts, the impellers, build it back up, and hopefully it works. So I'll clip back to you when it's done, and you'll then find out whether it works or not. So now the turbo's pretty much built up. We just need to put the wastegate back on, along with the adapter plate for the oil return on the bottom, and then the coolant lines, the braided lines, the new ones, they need to go back on as well, and when they're on, we can get it back on the engine. Refitting the wastegate's literally just the 2 bolts on the turbine housing. Gonna tighten them up with my calibrated wrist, and then the linkage just goes back on with the R-pin that we took off originally. Bend the leg out a little bit so it can't come out. Now I'm gonna fit the new adapter plate with a fresh gasket for the oil return line, and now the turbo is ready to go back on the engine. So now the rear turbo is back on the engine, we can now fit the oil feed line, the brand new oil return line, along with the new coolant lines that go from the turbo to the thermostat housing to allow the coolant to circulate around the turbo and cool the turbo down as it's in use, because it will get hot. So I've got the braided coolant lines on the rear and on the front, and you can see they just go around the edge. There's 2 brackets. I will try and clean the rust off them. And then I need to put 2 silicone hoses to bridge them over to where they need to go. I've also fitted the hard line from the top of the turbo, that just goes around the top, all the way down, and then to the bottom where the pressure switch is. And I've also fitted the brand new oil return line from the turbo, but I don't think I'm going to use it. I think I'm going to refit the old one after cleaning it up a bit, because it doesn't really fit. Look at this. So that is the new return pipe, and as you can see, it seems to be a bit long, and it's kinked there. It's kinked there going into the pan. And that is definitely the right one for this side, because the other one for the front is only this big, and that will not reach if I try and fit it to this. So I think my best option is to try and use this old one, just clean it up, stick it back on with a fresh gasket, some fresh sealer, and it should be alright. So now that's 2 new parts for this engine I bought that don't fit. Before I remove the turbo drain line, one thing we can do is you can fit the exhaust here onto there, because it's only 1, 2, 3, 4 nuts, and then this is on. So let's get this on, and there we go, all bolted up, all nice and tight. Now all that's left is the other turbo. Change the drain lines on that for the old one, and I'm also going to refurb the heat shield, so when I get them back on the engine, they'll all look nice and new, and it'll go with the rest of the engine with it looking fresh. So I'll clip back to you when I finish. I think it's safe to say this has been one of those videos where it's not really gone to plan, because I've kind of done the front turbo, but the issue I've got here is this is a linkage into the wastegate that was stuck, so I had to drill that out. I had to then tap it, put a bolt in, and put the link back on for it to work, but I'm not overly happy with it. As well as that, I'm missing a fire ring for the front turbo. Don't know where that's gone, so I'm going to need to buy one of them. And I think with the cartridges being the wrong cartridges and having to do everything I've had to do to get that to fit, and then the linkage on the front, and obviously the new drain pipe which doesn't even fit, I think I'm just going to buy new turbos, because I was looking online before, and I think I can get a pair, front and rear, for around £350, if not a little bit more. And I think at this point I'd rather spend the extra money than risk these not actually working, or, like I said at the start, going boom and taking the engine with them. I don't think it's worth the risk. So although I've spent what is the equivalent of 2.5 days trying to do this, I think it's been a waste of time. But one thing I will say is it's kind of also been a lesson, because it's taught me that refurbing everything isn't always the way. You need to buy new stuff sometimes, and I think in this case, buying new turbos is probably the best option I can go with, and it can't make it worse. But I gave it a good go, and it is quite good to see the engine with the turbos back on, kind of, to give me a glimpse of what it will look like when it's all put together. And the manifolds are clean. I know the coolant pipes fit, which is good, because they were the main concern, because they'd all crusted out when I took them off last time. So yeah, there's nothing left on the end of them. But the engine itself looks quite good as it stands, so I'm happy with that. And this is just the world of modifying cars or making a project car, or fixing a project car, should I say. Things go wrong, it doesn't always work, and it can take a lot longer than it's supposed to. So, unfortunately, we didn't get what I wanted to get done. So I'll have to buy the turbos, and when they come, we can throw them straight on, and hopefully that shouldn't take long, because we'll have to strip them all down. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you've liked the video. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you get an update every time I post, and I'll see you in the next one.
Afraid to turn out the